Black Queer Dogs. This meeting is being recorded. Black Queer Dogs, and together and collectively, we looked at what is currently going on in the world. We've seen like a change in global leadership, which including here in Botswana, which to an extent also does influence perceptions, attitudes towards various groups, and how people perceive us based on our race, skin color, sexual orientation, beliefs, migrant status, and so forth. And yeah, so we thought, why not have this conversation right now? And I'll just briefly hand it over to our colleagues in Black Queer Dogs to say a quick hi.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on hate speech and hate crimes. My name is Boto, and I am part of Black Queer Docs, and I'm here with a team, Matty, Matlohonolo Samsam, and Audrey. And yeah, we hope for a very fruitful conversation. We will also would like you to follow and so, follow us on Instagram at Black Queer Docs and on Facebook as well, and follow this conversation and many other parts of our work that we do. And thank you, Salk, for having us do this together.
Thank you, colleagues at Black Queer Dogs. To kick us off, we will just quickly share a quick song by one of our artists here in Botswana, Drama Boy.
Yeah, a re tibeleng batho ba rona, batho ba letsola mmala wa rona, re latlhile ngwao ya rona, ga re itse ko re tswa le isago ya rona, re lalwa ke makgowa mo lefatshe la rona, ba tsere teemane le ditshimo tsa rona, ba tla ka dikhamphane go hiriwa rona, le ga sengwe se nyelela go bidiwa rona, le gone ko dikolong go rutilwe rona, le thuto ya teng ga se thuto ya rona, e bolele tlhaloganyo ya bana ba rona, re rekisa airtime ka degree tsa rona, mapolotiki ba rata go tshega ka rona, speech sa go a se duele bili tsa rona.
Yeah, so that is Claria Sechava by Drama Boy. I'll just hand it over to Boto to just briefly talk about its relevance and linking it to our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Bradley. So I mean, this is number one, rest in peace, Drummer Boy, but one of very conscious rappers that we've had in our generation and has very much spoken about various kinds of oppressions, whether they are tribal based, whether they are economic based, and just the ways in which we navigate as young people who are finding our identity post-colonialism, post-independence in a country that has also had a role to play in what segregation has looked like in different forms, whether it's we've termed minority groups or marginalized groups, whether it's around how we engage in politics as young people who've been offered particular kinds of opportunities, but even in those same opportunities, we find ourselves going back to the ways in which we hoped that other older generations or elderly generations could have done better. And so for us, it's important to have a soundtrack like this that opens up to not only one group of marginalization or ways of marginalization, but unearth what the thread is among various groups of people with different experiences. Because I think the conversation today does speak to hate speech as a cross-cutting issue and not just an LBQ issue, not just the race issue, not just the tribal issue, but how do we start to have conversations around hate speech that holds each one of us accountable in our diversities and our differences, but also in the things that bring us to a common space. And so I mean, one of the lines he says is like our national anthem says, Fatsheleno la rona, which is very true. It is enshrined in our constitution that we are, we're all equal in front of, our statutory bodies and the like. So what does it look like for us to embrace and embody non-discrimination? And yeah, I think it's a cool way to see the song. And I think it's one of my favorite Drummer Boy songs. So
It
thing.
it really is. I was sharing with Buto earlier that this actually reminded me of last year during elections and how this song was very, very relevant. But yeah, let's not dominate the conversation because we can talk about this for forever. But before I hand it over to Anneke, I would also just like to welcome our key discussants from the Ombuds Office. We have Stephen Dirakosi, and from the media, we have Setu Mungatani. Um, yeah, so they will also share with us the work that they do in addressing hate speech in their various spheres. And also from you, if you are watching us from social media or joining us here live on Zoom, please don't forget to pose your questions, comments in the chat box, and we will definitely address them. Yeah, so I will introduce quickly the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Litigation Center, Anneke Mbiyarkota, who will also just briefly take us through the legislative aspect. Over to you, Anneke.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you this morning. I do like starting with the Botswana musician because you guys really know how to create a cool, warm vibe for us on this very cold morning. And I feel it's a bit wrong that we stopped the music so quickly, but we can play it again right at the end. I will try to continue the warm vibe by talking about something very terrible, hate speech. And I think this is something in all our communities that have been said over and over. It's a slippery slope from having hate speech and tolerating hate speech to us actually having violence and genocide in our societies. So we do need to address hate speech in all its forms wherever we find ourselves. And there's a lot of existential questions about hate speech, about why are we so tolerant of it when it's not something that's actually intrinsic supposed to be about how we are. We're not born to hate other people. And it's important to think about what is it in our society that makes us start spewing hate speech, engaging in hate crimes. And I think it's a question more broadly than it's about hate. And I think in every place we encountered as any community, we need to figure out its roots and figure out how to deal with that hate and to actually say no to it. And a lot of it is around misunderstanding, around ignorance, around fear. And these are, so as we have increased misinformation and disinformation on social media and in our news, there's also increased hate speech as a result. And this is very worrying. So we don't just need to deal with hate speech, we need to deal with misinformation and propaganda as well. So the UN has been quite vocal on speaking about what one should do when you encounter hate speech, about trying to reflect from it, not respond by spewing out more hate, to fact check biased information and propaganda, to help educate people about hate speech, and to challenge anyone who actually engages in hate speech or hate crimes, and to support those people who are victims of that. And then finally, to report where we do come across it online or in newspapers or in the media or any other platforms. So people have often tolerated hate speech on the basis that it's part of freedom of speech. That's not actually the case. And I think it's very important to differentiate between hate speech and freedom of speech. People say there's a very fine line. We'll speak a bit about that. But as soon as we recognize that there's a fine line, then we start tolerating hate speech. And it's actually quite clear that hate speech ought not to be tolerated, and freedom of speech ought not to extend to hate speech. But there's counter discourses on that, especially by those people who do engage in hate speech. They love defending the right to freedom of expression. So not all people who promote rights are necessarily against hate. There are also people promoting their individual rights to free speech, to justify why they incite hatred and violence. So I'll give a brief explanation as much as I can. There's no universal definition of hate speech. Under international law, it refers to the incitement to discriminate, to hostility, or to violence. The UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech define hate speech as any type of communication in any way that is discriminatory in language with reference to a specific group. This is a bit broader than the legal definition under international law. And when we speak about hate speech, we're not speaking about people saying, I hate my government. That's not hate speech. That's engaging in criticism of your government. What we're talking here is about people attacking individuals. And so hate speech is really about speech that is discriminatory, that takes it can take any form, and that is based specifically on identity factors of individuals. And those identity factors are not exhaustive, and it's important that we note that. So I'll speak a little bit about what is in Botswana laws already. And you'll see, if you're not familiar with laws, then that number 3 in the top of the text is this section, and at the bottom where it says constitution, that's, for example, the law. So it's the section in that law. So section 3 of the constitution specifically speaks about the fundamental rights of everyone. And even though you have fundamental rights, your rights right there at the end says may not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others or the public interest. So obviously hate speech prejudices others, and it is not in the public's interest. So it's not actually part of freedom of expression. The Constitution, again, also when it goes into freedom of conscience, it says that that right can be limited in defense of protecting the rights of others and in defense of protecting democracy. And the same with freedom of expression. It says that everyone has the right to freedom of expression, but that right can be limited in the case where it jeopardizes public safety, and when it interferes with the rights of other persons and their privacy. So, and this presentation will be shared in the chat box for everyone. So the Constitution specifically speaks about the right to be protected from discrimination, which means that there's a positive duty on private and public bodies to also fight against hate speech, as hate speech would can be seen as a form of discrimination. So the Constitution defines what discrimination means in subsection 3, but the courts of Botswana have been very clear that this is not limited to only those grounds, and it can, for example, includes grounds such as hate speech on the basis of sexual orientation or on the basis of HIV status or any other similarly analogous grounds which target people based on their characteristics and their dignity. So if your rights have been violated, obviously one can have remedies to deal with that, including going to the courts. And there's a lot of people, I think, just for us to reflect on that as we talk about hate speech, and I mentioned this in the beginning, we are going to get a lot of countering opinions of people saying, Yes, but what about my right to freedom of religion? And what about my right to media freedom and my right to freedom of expression? And so we're going to talk about that, but our focus, I think, in this webinar is not on those people's rights, but actually to say, well, no right extends to engaging in hate, because as a society, we do not want to go there. Because once we go there, there will be no social cohesion and there will be no peace. So that means that we have to stop normalizing hate. And I think we have all started normalizing it. We've all started to accept it. And over many hundreds of years, to be honest, how often are you in a conversation where people say misogynist things about women, for example, which then justifies gender-based violence, and which is pervasive in our society. And the same happens for hate speech or remarks that will eventually lead to hate speech against people on the basis of their immigration status, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their disability, or any other ground, really. So we do need to, as a society, speak out. And I think that's really what we want to encourage in this webinar. So my focus is going to be on just telling you what some of the laws are that might or might not be used to hold people accountable who do express hate. The remainder of the webinar will focus really on strategies that have been used in Botswana itself and other ways where one can actually build on those strategies to counter hate speech and hate crimes in Botswana. So in the law, there's a number of offenses which one can actually use against people who express hate. Now, before one uses those offenses, it is also possible to go to the court and actually sue someone for damages. Not always that easy, because it does require money and a lawyer. But that aside, it would be possible to sue someone for damages. And I think it's worth actually looking into that in terms of suing someone who expresses constant hatred of a specific group and how that then impacts on members of that group. So actually going as a number of officials and suing one individual could be something that could be explored as a strategy to try and get people to be deterred from committing hate speech. Don't go to court to think you're going to get money from it. The courts seldom award a lot of money for defamation, and you would also spend money just in your legal case. It might take some while, but it would be important as a way to highlight the issues. And there's some requirements around civil defamation, and I won't go into that. But the way people can get out of a case of civil defamation would be to say, yes, but they published information because it was for the public benefit or because it was reasonable in a democratic society. Now, none of these defenses would justify engaging in hate speech. So, yes, then in the penal code, there's also an offense of criminal defamation. That is when instead of suing someone in the civil courts, you actually lay a criminal charge against them for defamation. Now, this is not an offense one would typically want to use often because it's most often used against people who are critical of the state. So it's an offense that's has led to a lot of misuse by governments. So it's not an offense that one really want to encourage, but it is available should people want to use that where defamatory matter exposes a person to hatred. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's up to people do have the right to use whatever legal remedies are available to them. I won't go into that too much. There are a lot of exclusions to your ability to lay a charge of criminal defamation. Then in some of our newer laws, there's also a lot of offenses related to what gets said online. So, for example, it would be cyber harassment if you threaten to inflict injury or physical harm to a person. So if you, for example, go online and say, I would want to kill gays because they really should not be here, that would be threatening to inflict physical harm, and that would constitute an offense under the Cybercrimes Act. Similarly, cyber stalking would be a way where you're harassing people and making them actually in fear for their own lives. And this can be harassing an individual or a community of persons. And that can sometimes then lead to where hate speech actually incites violence against groups of people. So cyber stalking would be one of the offenses one can then use. And then you can also, there's an offense of making electronic communications that disturb the peace and privacy of people. Now, importantly, all these offenses, you wouldn't go to court on these offenses. These are criminal charges. So you'd go to a police station and ask them to charge someone under the Cybercrimes Act. It might be that not all the police are trained on the Cybercrimes Act, in which case one would want to just take the law with you if you do try and lay a complaint under this law, and open a case under this act. The act specifically prohibits racist or xenophobic material. And this is also very important. I think increasingly there's xenophobia across our region, and we do need to make a stand and call it out whenever we do come across it. And there's also what they refer to as racist or xenophobic motivated insult. So you can see there's quite a number of crimes that one would be able to use to try and counter hate speech where we come across it with when it's online, or when it's through, for example, online newspapers, websites, or radio even, because that would constitute electronic communication as well. So you can, there is also what they call improper use of a public telecommunication system. Sometimes one might want to use something like that as an offense. And then the penal code is probably where most of the offenses stem from. So the penal code prohibits expressions of hatred, showing hatred or contempt against a person on the basis of their race, tribe, place of origin, color, or creed. So this would mean also using this offense against persons who are targeted because of their because they're refugees or asylum seekers or undocumented migrants, or persons who are targeted because of xenophobia. It is a little bit limited to not really go beyond that. There is the offense of alarming publications. Again, this is a very problematic offense because it's often used by governments against people who criticize corruption and other sort of things, but there might be instances in which one can definitely say certain publications cause disturbance of the public peace, and that it should be a basis on which one counter things. So, for example, when Donald Trump in the election said that Haitians are eating people's pets, that would be an example of an alarming publication that then incites violence as a response. There's a lot of offenses in Botswana's laws relating to breach of peace. And I think when we do messaging about hate speech, it's important to emphasize that in Botswana, it's a peaceful society, and we do not want breach of peace created as a result of hate. So there's breach of peace offenses linked specifically to public gatherings. So, for example, if you have religious groups having a public gathering which actually spews hatred against people based on their sexual orientation, one could try and use this section to challenge it. It's a bit tricky around religious groups in Botswana because, as you'll see now, a lot of the provisions in Botswana's laws are very protective of religious speech. The Public Order Act also doesn't allow a breach of peace, so you could argue that where people congregate and they start inciting hatred against groups, that could constitute a breach of peace. There's threatening breach of peace or violence, also in the Penal Code. Incitement to violence, so remember, hate speech includes people inciting violence against specific groups. So one could use this offense for that. And then the Penal Code specifically prohibits discrimination as well. So it would be, you could try and have a criminal offense. Again, this is not as broad as the discrimination provision in the Constitution itself, unfortunately. And I think there's a lot that we can argue because Botswana's penal code is so dated. There is a lot of reform that one could do advocacy on to make the provisions that are there a bit broader. That being said, there's a lot of offenses on religion. They do not like anyone attacking religion, disturbing religious assemblies, wounding religious feelings, etc. Penal Code prohibits insulting language, so that could be used against hate speech. And here's an interesting one. The president is allowed to deport people who threatens to endanger the peace in the country. And there's a good example of that when an American pastor tried to, that date is wrong, it should be 2016, I think, when an American pastor wanted to come to to Botswana and South Africa. He was prohibited entry into South Africa. He entered Botswana, but he was then deported on the basis that he had a lot of expressions of hate towards people based on their sexual orientation. I mean, the same person has also expressed, for example, a lot of hate against Obama, saying if people should kill him and stuff like that. So it's a very hateful person, and it's a good example of how countries can take a stand and say, we don't want this in our society. And if you think a country might not be that upset if it's someone speaking about gays, for example, that same person are likely to have also said a lot of other stuff around a whole range of other people. So it's important to research people as well and show that hateful people tend to be hateful about a lot of things and people and issues. Now, just to say that as much as one would want to take a stand against hate speech, we also want to acknowledge that sometimes hate speech is committed on the basis of ignorance. And in addition to having people being reprimanded and held accountable for hate speech, the law is not going to lock those people away. And it might not help having them sentenced because they might just end up coming out of prison more angry and more hateful and espousing more hate. So I think part of it is also about how one convince people to change. And it is possible for people to change. Not all people, but some people. And where there is that possibility, courts may, for example, order someone to attend classes on sensitization of the specific groups that they, or engage in community service with groups that they have expressed hatred for, or to even pay compensation. There is a provision in the Criminal Procedure Act where a court can actually order someone to stop using the language they're using and to monitor whether or not they're doing it. It's a bit of a dated provision, but it's there. And then just in addition to hate speech offenses, sometimes ordinary crimes, well, not ordinary, I mean, crimes that we know of already, like murder or rape or grievous bodily harm, are used against specific groups. In that instance, we would call that a hate crime. And the person would still be sentenced with, for example, murder, but because they committed it out of hate, there might be a basis on which to argue for aggravated sentence to deter other people from engaging in hate crimes. And here it's the magistrates might not, and High Court judges might not always be that aware of the need to show that the courts must take a stand against hate crimes, and it might be useful to think about training them and about specifically engaging prosecutors to ask for aggravated sentences where a crime was committed as a result of hatred towards a specific group. And you would know that it requires an aggravated sentence if it was a hate crime, or it showed hostility towards the victims, or was motivated by that hostility. And then I think just to say that where we see intolerance of people in society, we need to advocate against it, because intolerance is what is making our society sick and violent and hateful, and we need to stand up against it. And we need to encourage courts to take the issue very seriously, because this intolerance threatens social cohesion and it increases harm, and we want the courts to and the law to be a deterrence to people who are committing hate speech and hate crimes. And one could also, for example, work with the courts to have sentencing guidelines, or to have the law specifically emphasize that where crimes are committed as a result of hatred, that there would be an aggravated sentence. And other penal codes in the region do actually have those provisions within their laws themselves. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's important to acknowledge that those people who commit hate crimes in our current society actually paints themselves as victims. You can imagine, for example, the January 6 rioters in the US, where they have now been painted as victims, when actually what they did was trying to engage in an insurrection and overturn government. And that happens all the time, where people start saying, I shame, someone just expressed their opinion, we shouldn't be so harsh on them, they have the right to express their opinion, but sometimes that opinion can have devastating results. And so even at a regional level, in the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression, which was passed by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, says that freedom of speech does not include hate speech, and that states need to act firmly, including through criminal sanctions, to deal with hate speech. And that there's a need to actually look at this, and you wouldn't want to criminalize all forms of speech where offense can be used so widely that it attacks freedom of speech, but where someone's speech actually can lead to the likelihood of harm, then and to incite violence, then it is important for that speech to be prohibited. And then finally, just as a practical measure, if we're going to show our intolerance towards intolerance, then we need to report every time we see hate speech on social media. And if you go, these are hyperlinks, and each of the social media platforms do actually have ways in which one can report hate speech. The TikTok one is the best one, actually. And this little bit is from their website where they actually explain what hate speech is. And they also encourage people who have been affected by hate speech to actually also seek help. Not just to report, but to actually try and seek help and counseling because they recognize the devastating effect it has. And if you look at the TikTok definition of characteristics on which hate speech can be committed, it is quite wide, and it's not exhaustive. So in conclusion, it's important that we support free speech and we condemn hate speech, and the two are not the same. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Anneke, for that very useful pieces of information. We have put in the presentation in the chat box. And for those that are watching on Facebook, if you would also like to access the presentation, please inbox us your email contacts and we'll definitely send the presentation over to you. Yeah, I think over to Black Queer Docs now as we just shift the boat a little bit just to talk around what are we doing as communities, as civil society organizations, as governments in Botswana to address hate, hate crimes, hate speech, and any other forms that this manifest in, right? Over to Black Queer Docs. If you do have questions, comments, please put them on the chat boxes, Facebook chat box or the Zoom chat box. Questions, comments, and we will definitely address them. Boto.
Thanks, Bradley. Thank you so much, Anneke, for that foundation. And we will share a little bit as well as Black Queer Docs around just like contextually what it looks like for us to speak about hate crimes, but also ways in which we posing, what kind of strategies we think have been useful in our work. And after that, after Meti speaks a little bit about that, we will have Stephen Tiroya Khosi to just share a little bit from the Office of the Ombudsman what their experiences have been around hate speech and if there are any reflections where there's cases of hate speech or hate crimes that have been lodged with the Ombuds Office. And then finally, we will have Situ, but please feel free again to share your comments and questions on the chat. Situ will speak a little bit more on media and yes, media, especially around how, media sees hate crime reports and hate speech and can perpetuate hate speech and some of the ways we can mitigate those issues. Meti?
Let's turn my video on. Good morning, everyone. My name is Meti Samsam, pronounced she, her. I'm from Black Queer Docs. I just turned my video on to say hi, but throughout my very short presentation, I'll have my video off. So I think Anneke has given a beautiful overview of the legal context, and I will be giving what hate speech looks like from a community perspective and what we think about when we talk about hate speech from Black Queer Docs. So we had a conversation around hate speech not being an isolated act or being specific to us as queer communities, but rather it reflecting and sustaining the unequal power relations that we see in our societies. So we thought of it like gender-based violence and how it's rooted in the different systems that we operate within, things like patriarchy, things like ableism, like heteronormativity, and all the other oppressive systems. And while we as queer communities are often targeted. We know that women are also targeted. We see it a lot in social media. We know that people living with disabilities are also targeted. People living with HIV, sex workers, migrants, and people who are considered ethnic minorities. So we're thinking that as civil society organizations, we cannot advocate solely for one group. We can't say we're an LBQ organization and therefore just focus on the issues that we think are for us and focus on rights that we think are for us while we accept dehumanizing treatment for others. We are a feminist organization and we believe that our feminist and human rights practices must be consistent, must be holistic, and we must speak up and also speak with everyone who's affected, because sometimes when you speak on behalf of people, you miss out on things that may be critical for them because you don't personally experience their struggles. And we really had a deep conversation around how language is not neutral and how sometimes language shapes how we see ourselves and how we see other people. And then an example that we talked about was in the case of Botswana, how we've seen the disability movement coming out to say you can't call people living with disabilities dihole. Like we know that we use that term a lot, which reduces them to their what we see as their impairments and denies their humanity, but rather calling them bana le bole. And then terms like matanyola, which has been used against queer identities. It refers to anal sex for those who are not familiar with Setswana. So it reduces queer people basically to sexual acts, which does not give an adequate depiction of who we are and our diverse identities. And also is used to dehumanize and discriminate and reinforce stigma against queer persons. And we know how we can be also very xenophobic. We know how migrants are treated in Botswana and the kind of language that we use when we refer to migrants. And also the need to realize that these are not just words, but they have formed a part of social climate that normalizes discrimination, that normalizes hate, that normalizes exclusion, and in some cases, even violence. So just really thinking about how we need to not just challenge laws and policies, but also to rethink about the cultural norms, the societal norms that underpin and support the different systems of oppression that we complain about. And then also just having that understanding that we experience hate speech and violence differently depending on the different identities that we have. So it cannot be an issue that is within a single movement. For example, if I'm a queer person living with disability and I have HIV and I'm a sex worker, there's different conversations and different challenges that I would experience, and we would see that a lot of the times I would be not adequately represented in the different spaces that focus on single issues that are specific to single identities. So our advocacy strategies, therefore, should ask, as we engage in conversations, who is being left out of that conversation, who is speaking on their behalf, and what authority do they have to speak on behalf of those people, and how do we ensure that we are bringing everyone who should be in spaces to particular spaces. And then working together as communities to like challenge the norms that we have created for ourselves that are violent, and also talking about the invisible hierarchies that are within our movements as well. Like even within the LBQ movement, how are we helpful to communities like trans communities, to people living with disabilities, and vice versa. So at Black Queer Docs, our work really is aimed at centering different voices as a starting point, but not bringing people like as an afterthought. It's still a work in progress, and we're really trying to find ways in which we can repair harm while we are also addressing the root causes of hate And something that we are really big on is centering dignity, centering care, centering wellness, and creating spaces where we can collectively heal from the hurt that the different systems, the cultural norms, the community norms have created, and seeing how we can work and function within those communities to raise awareness. Because like I said earlier, sometimes hate speech, violence comes from misinformation and lack of understanding. So how do we make sure that we are having those conversations to say that actually this thing that we so much our hearts that we take so lightly is hurtful to someone, and we need to move in a different direction. And then also we are very big on building solidarity across movements. Some of the work that we have done, not so recently, but recently, was around the Universal Periodic Review shadow reports, where we collected evidence of violations against trans persons, against women, against LBQ persons, against the gay men, and wrote a shadow report about the different systematic challenges that we face, and also the discrimination, the lack of policies and legal protections, and made recommendations to the government. So working across movement is very important because it kind of it amplifies the reach and also gives a certain level of legitimacy when you're dealing with issues. It shows that this is a human rights issue. It's not like one group of people asking for special rights. It's not an issue that only affects a select few of people, but it's a broader issue. So something that we would like to reflect on as we engage is how we shift the harmful language in our communities, in media, in schools, in our own homes, within our friend groups, to language that is more affirming of everyone's dignity, and also maybe even come up with maybe one concrete way in which we, the people who are present here, can work together across the movement to address hate speech and hate crimes. Yeah, thank you. I think you add on anything if I left anything out, Boto.
Thank you, Meti. I think you did a great job of sharing that context and some of the ways in which Black Queer Docs works around, intersecting issues that could potentially support the work on hate crimes and hate issues. And also really just wanting to reiterate on the point that you mentioned around this being a collective issue, that we must also reflect as, marginalized people from marginalized groups or communities, that we are also sometimes are the people who are harmful to other groups that are marginalized. So in as much as we're speaking to a society, it is important to also for us to recognize that we are part of the society, and we also have some social conditioning that has led us to being perpetuators of hate speech as well. So with that, I think we can move on to Stefan, if you're here.
I presume that Stephen is me.
Oh, sorry, Stephen Deroya Kosi, yes.
Yes. Yeah, that's me. Thank you. I think what you want to note is the very beautiful presentation that was made by the first presenter. And the biggest challenge is that free speech or hate speech are such a collision, in the sense that technically there's no definition of hate speech in any legislation when you look at it, especially in Botswana in particular. And hence one has to look at the content of any particular statement to determine whether it actually comes out as hate or causing incitement of denigrating, on tending to look down on any person because of any reason, especially looking at the context of the Constitution of Botswana. When you look at the penal laws, they're almost vague from where I stand, insofar as one has to look at the discriminatory intent So one has to like look at the particular facts. From where I stand and from my previous life, I think if one were to bring a case relating to hate speech in this country, it's going to be quite a hill to climb, because hate speech has to be contextual. But and I always jokingly say certain things are like pornography. You can't describe them, but you can see them. And I think it's for one to see the content of speech amounting to hate speech and amounting to denigration or belittling of any person on account of the discriminatory prohibitions laid out in the Constitution. In that regard, one would have to look at the court, for instance, as to how they would understand the content of any hate speech, particularly vis-a-vis how they interpret any legislation, and they're how able to stretch the interpretation of the legislation that they are looking at to see whether the speech made is tantamount to hate speech, or is intended to be cruel, denigrating, or diminishing the dignity of any person. The Constitution of Botswana in particular prohibits any speech or any behavior that intends to discriminate any person on the basis of their conscience. And for me, that is really the red line. When do you determine that anyone's beliefs have been trampled upon? As I said, it's a matter of content. There are no cases that I can think of in this country that would demonstrate exactly what speech would amount to hate speech. So one would have to look at various jurisdictions as to what contains speech or imagery or any other presentation that is pejorative, that is discriminatory, that is belittling or exposing one to a contemptuous determination by other people. I think at this stage, really, this is what my intervention would be. And that, speaking from my current position, from the office that I work in the office of the Ombudsman, I would say that we have not really had complaints of any behavior amounting to hate speech. So as a result, for us, it would be an exploratory case if we were to get one to determine whether anyone's dignity has been denigrated by any speech amounting to hate speech. I think I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen Tiruakhosi, and for just sharing some of your experiences. And, I think it's hopefully a good sign that there haven't been cases reported, but hoping that it's not for a lack of information and access from people in different communities that potentially might require that service. But I think the purpose, again, of this conversation is to ensure that we share as much information as we can with communities, people, organizations that could be impacted by hate speech and hate crimes. With that, we will move on to Seto. I'm not sure if I can see Seto here.
Hi, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, unmuting the mic is sometimes an extreme spot.
Yeah, I also think here the because I work in a radio station, so it gets a little noisy, so I was just trying to de- decrease it so that you can be able to hear me. Good morning. It's just 4 minutes before afternoon. Our conversation today is a very important one, and thank you so much to Salk and to Black Queer Docs for having me come through today. I just am switching on the mic and the video just so that you can appreciate me. Please don't mind the music. I work in a radio station. I'm a broadcast journalist, so there will always be music. It's also my job to monitor the radio. But at this particular point, I'm giving you my ultimate attention. Uh, so, yeah, let me take off the video because you're going to also be disturbed by people getting into my office time and again. Thank you so much to the presenters that have gone before me. What I want to say as a start is that media reflects or captures the consciousness of any society, and as we talked about, Annika talked about in the beginning, that there is no overall, or there's no definitive definition of hate speech. It's so true, but it also is contextual to every single country. One of the things in media that we have realized that affects or that contributes to hate speech in Botswana, and that makes it so normal that we also find ourselves as media reporting along those lines of hate speech. Firstly, I want to say, when we say that incites violence, sometimes we kind of want to say things that are inciting violence. It has to be physical violence. But with Botswana, I heard again somebody saying Botswana is a peaceful society. Botswana is a violent society. Our violence is just not, one, that much reported. Two, also not always physical violence. It's emotional violence, it's financial violence, it's violence in the sense of exclusion. So what comes out as hate speech in Botswana? I've just put a number of factors that come out as hate speech. One of them is tribalism. Tribalism in Botswana that comes out in hate speech has been normalized. It's even been normalized by our constitution. Re Tiruagosi, our ombudsman, Advocate Tiruagosi, can attest to that. We have laws that in themselves are saying that our society is unequal. So depending on which tribe you come from, Botswana has a history of some tribes are better than others. So some people are more people than others. And that has come out in the words that people use to describe. For example, I'm Mnguni. My mother is Mnguni. My dad is Kalanga. They are not from non-Setswana speaking tribes. Therefore, I am from tribes that have been called Lee before, dehumanized in how you speak to the people or the persons that are coming from that tribe. There's ableism, the inability to see people with disability as being fully human. There's queer phobia, and this queer phobia has been normalized, where it's just spoken in mainstream, because in other societies you find that hate speech is, people shy away from what is known as hate speech. But in Botswana, what brings itself out as hate speech has been normalized to places where some people don't know that they're inflicting hate, but they are inflicting hate, and they are also emboldening those that will go a step further to continue with those practices because it's taken as normal. So sexism which is one of the reasons why our GBV is so high, is that there's that culture of speaking about women in a derogatory way, associating women with derogatory ways. It even translates to the hate speech or discrimination that goes to sex workers. Xenophobia has been mentioned before, which is also a really huge problem. So when we report as media, as I said, we reflect the consciousness of our society in our reports, but we are also part of that society. So without the society consciously moving away from the hate speech, then you find that our reports are very problematic in certain spaces. And I work in broadcast journalism. And when you are broadcasters, it's real life things happening. So you find sometimes you're on the radio, somebody is on air, and because it is so normalized and so ingrained, they're going to say something that is hateful. If you are not trained enough and if you are not literate enough to recognize this as hate speech, then you find that you don't get to stop, you don't play a disclaimer, you don't get to ask them to retract, and it continues in the cycle of normalizing what should not be normalized, which is hate speech. Why am I saying that these things end with violence? If you take, for example, Basara, the people from the Bakhalahadi tribes, there have been some of the most abused people as employees, including Zimbabweans, which are migrant workers, which again it reflects itself as xenophobia. Those three groups of people have been the most abused. Home, domestic workers, the most abused cattle headers, the most abused, informal settlement, informal workers, or unskilled labor workers. If you talk to sexism, and when I say it's normalized, it's also, I can say, to a certain extent, forgive me, advocate, but to a certain extent, it's government sponsored. And I'm saying this as the community that is here right now. I know South is here, Black Queer Dogs is here. We saw during the decriminalization appeal, the decrim appeal, government field advocate Sidney Pilan, who, in his defense of why decriminalization of same-sex conduct should continue, use derogatory words in court, in a public space that is a symbol of justice. That in itself is a reflection of where the consciousness of this nation is. And this was a person representing government. And the same advocate has done the same in the CKGR burial case. This time he wasn't in court, but he was outside of court and sharing the sentiments, belittling a person of Basara origin, and speaking to Basara, the tribe itself, to their mannerism, to what he called their entitlement, and really killing years of showing marginalization. So you can say that this was a representative of government. So if a representative of government can do that, they're emboldening everybody else who believes that it's a way of life, it's a way of speaking, and they continue to visit violence in certain groups of people. It's also religion sponsored. Botswana is a very, very secular state, but the government itself, or those that are in power itself, including even the current government after we changed government, have a way of purporting that Botswana is a Christian state without saying that. So there's a consciousness in this country that Botswana is a Christian state. So you find that we have a religious sponsored hate speech and discrimination because religion is homophobic, because religion, looks at queer persons in a certain way, because religion looks at disabled people in a certain way. So when we report as media, we have tried to, as well, in spaces where media is an ally to inclusion, have tried to grow the consciousness of the nation. And I say that working for a very feminist radio station, which airs in itself. I mean, just this morning, as management, we were having a heated meeting on whether we should stop playing R. Kelly on our airways. Half of us saying we are decidedly a feminist radio station. How are we playing R. Kelly and emboldening abusers in the Botswana GBV and the rape statistics that we have? Well, but we, as a consciously, we have partnered with queer organizations. We've partnered with marginalized persons. We've partnered with feminist organizations to try and raise the level of conversations to teach the nation that some of the things that we say or some of the things that we do are actually contributing to hate speech, contributing to lack of inclusion, and contributing to the discrimination of other persons. Another thing that Botswana is lacking at this particular point is I'm so glad that the Human Rights Office have moved to the Ombudsman. But I'm appealing to you, Advocate Tirakhosi, in this conversation that we have tried to reach out to the Ombudsman. We have offered our platforms to say, need to facilitate your office so that it can be able to have dialogues with the nation. What are the parameters of your work as the housing of the Human Rights Office in Botswana? When it was at the office of the president, it was one office with one officer. It wasn't properly capacitated to be able to drive these human rights conversations, to be able to say to people, this is what inclusion is, to be able to say to the nation, or to be able to even train important institutions such as media to say, this is how we handle hate speech, how we are able to bring forward to the fore conversations that build, conversations that build inclusion. This is what, when we say do no harm, as the fourth estate, it means we can represent free speech, we can represent the ways of people, we can bring both sides of the story, but being conscious of the fact that we don't come and regurgitate or give hate a platform. But that's not what is happening right now. So I think even the public itself don't even have the literacy levels to understand the hate speech, but the ombudsman's office, or the office of human rights that is now sitting in the ombudsman's office, should be the ones that is leading these conversations. So the literacy level of Botswana should be raised, and the media is the right place to be able to take advantage of that, so that we can correct how hate speech happens in Botswana. So that is my 2 cents. I think I've included everything that I really wanted to include. But to the rest of civil society that is in this conversation, the other 2 solutions that I think will work is, one, create allyship with media. That is so important. Creating allyship. Some of us are already activists. We work in the space. So when I began to work in media, coming from civil society, I already had an understanding, but some of the people don't have that understanding. So it's important for us to be able to create allyship within the media, to refigure, because media is part of civil society, but to reconfigure the attitudes so that people do really understand what their space is when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to the fighting of hate speech, when it comes to the amplifying of positive voices. Another thing is sponsored funding progressive content. We are businesses. I work for a commercial radio station. Yes, we try as much as possible to create spaces for these progressive conversations, but we are also, in media in Botswana right now, is crying for funding. So of course, sometimes they will reproduce and recreate what is commercially viable. Some of these hateful, or what we know as damaging, because you and I know what this is, as damaging headlines, for them is a catchy headline that will be able to bring commercial success. So if civil society understands that some of these are businesses, and therefore they bring in progressive sponsored content that will bring enough space for educating an illiterate and an hurtful nation, then we can move in the right direction. So with that, I'm saying thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk on hate speech in the media.
Thank you so much, Sato, for that very broad and comprehensive engagement on, the various stakeholders responsible for some of the hate speech that we see and has been normalized, has been given airwaves, no pun intended, with regards to how they engage or speak about various groups of people. And I think in the spirit of speaking about, what can be done or what's in our different corners, whether we're civil society, whether we're media, whether we're, government departments, I think some of the reflections that you shared about what we can do are very practical things. And, speaking around, media as well, I just wanted to also maybe, put it in the room that what does it look like for civil society as well? Because I think the thing that we do a lot as in our country is that we are very good at compartmentalizing issues. So when we speak about hate crime, we wait for the example that you gave around like inciting physical violence when not necessarily we're not a physically violent nation, right? We are a very vile in other ways and violent in other ways that is not to the eye or seen in the eye as physically violent. And so I think that in the ways in which we speak about hate crime happening on social media, happening on radio stations, that is very much discriminatory and the like, which is what some of these radio stations that we have still perpetuate, whether it's homophobia amongst the presenters themselves or towards groups of conversations around homosexuality and many others have been normalized so much. But yet we have a regulatory body like BOCRA, Botswana Communications Regulatory Authority, who, we know that many radio stations have, under BOCRA, have an obligation to give and present information that is not discriminatory, that is not hateful. But I don't necessarily think that as Botswana, this is something we take on as our responsibility and citizen responsibility to do. And I think that as we weave our ways and strategies towards how we can tackle hate speech and hate speech, particularly where media is concerned, those are avenues that we can start to engage in. We do have access to folks in the media who can lead the conversation as well, right? Because that is not necessarily our realm of expertise sometimes as civil society. And I think one other big thing for me, at least, when I speak about compartmentalization, is that the ways in which hate speech has showed up in Botswana and subsequently, discrimination in other ways, is that we are very much negligent of our history, right? The reason why tribalism still persists is that there was enslavement amongst tribes, but we don't speak about it in that way. We make it seem as if this is a reality that was swept after 1966, which is not the truth. And so when we weave conversations, and especially with officers like the Ombudsman who have public fora to do so, these are conversations that we need to have. It feels like we're living in a post-colonial Botswana that has forgotten what happened before independence and the like. And I think this is the ways in which we start to lose ourselves in normalizing language that shouldn't be normalized. So those experiences are valid. Those experiences are very much a stepping stone to how we can reshape our language, reshape our societies and our thinking. Yeah, and I don't know if there's any comments in the chat or if somebody just wants to throw in something as we are here. We have about 15 minutes to time. Feel free. You can keep your camera off. No.
There was a question to Stephen just around the mandate of the Ombuds Office. And so the question goes, is the Ombuds Office in Botswana an open door policy? I fear people might not know if they can approach the office and report their matters. Yeah, so I think just yeah, who can access the office of the ombuds, communities, is it government, and so forth. I think that was one of the questions I saw. So over to Stephen.
Can I complete the question quickly also, Bradley? So Ray can also just answer all the bundle up. It's all on the Ombuds office. Yeah, so I wanted to also find out following that, if the office of the Ombuds in Botswana, I'm not very certain if the office is independent, or if they are still under state and therefore relies on the budget that is allocated by the state. And if they are not yet independent, just now suggesting this, one of the strategies for civil society would be maybe to advocate for their independence. Thank you.
There's a hand up, Nomsa. I think Bradley's probably.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you so much for all the great presentation. Mine is a comment to say the work that you're really doing, it's really great. And I'm just thinking of someone that sits in South Africa, and a country that is seen as one of the countries that has, you know, the constitution and all the legal protections for queer people. But the honest part is that the same issues that Botswana is going through, we are also going through. And I wanted to say that it would be great for us to have these kind of conversations. Maybe if we can also broaden them to other countries, because this kind of learning is very needed, especially in the world that we live in with the Trump administration, people losing funding and everything. But I think it's important for us to deepen our knowledge around hate speech and hate crimes, because in as much as we do have our own Hate Crimes Act, which is available in South Africa for use, I've personally realized that most people don't even understand what that hate crimes bill talks about, or they don't even know how to use it. So maybe it's good for queer docs to kind of think of how can you also host these conversations with us in other countries, so that you can open up people's minds and people can start working a lot more on the legal fraternity, so that they can understand how these laws operate, but also they can understand how we can protect ourselves from the anti-gender movement. Because again, in South Africa, there's a lot of hate crimes that I mean, like hate speech that is happening even within the parliament, where people are pushing against some of the bills that have been passed. And I think it's important for us to collaborate in this great work. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Nomsa. Valid points. Do we still have Stephen Tirakris? I see you're here.
Yes, I'm still here.
Yes. There was a couple of questions that was assigned to you. First one, just the participants asking how they can reach out to the Ombuds office. Is it an open door policy? As they fear people might not know if they can approach the office to report issues of hate speech violations.
And it has
And
an
then the
open.
other question from Danny was linked to the independence of the office of the ombuds. Is the office independent from government? Do you receive funding from government? If so, how does this link to the independence of the office?
Thank you. I think let's start with the second question. Is the office independent from the government? We are obviously an agency set up by government. We receive funding from government. But I think what we need to understand is we are focused more on functional independence, such that when we do our work, we separate from government. We believe that functionally we are very independent from government. We don't have any influence in the determinations that we make in any respect. To the extent that one may feel that independence is hindered by the lack by being funded by government, that is something really beyond our say, because an office like this set up by law must necessarily be set up, be funded by some funding from some government structure. We are not going to pretend that the nature of funding may constrain us. We agree that being funded by government has its own constraints, in the sense that we have a very ambitious view of how we should carry out our mandate, but we are subject to the constraints of the lack of funding that we experience from time to time, like any other government funded agency. The second one is that we maintain, and that is the first question, we maintain an open view and an open door policy. So complaints come in, a complaint is assessed within the terms of the act, and if it is valid, it is taken up and investigated. So that's that. And I just wanted to comment on something that Setu said. Setu, we actually have a very ambitious outreach project, including podcasts, webinars, and other stakeholder engagement activities planned for this financial year, subject to, like I said, the funding that may constrain us. But we want to have a platform where we engage with the public. We've had one already in Maung. We are planning one or two others in the next 3 to 4 weeks, a public lecture on issues both in Francistown and Maung. But the biggest challenge for us is that the need to identify relevant issues for the public to that can actually make the public get interested in the discussions that we want to carry. We want to really be a thought leader in the area of uh, human rights issues, so that we spread knowledge, we spread engagement on issues such as the one we have today. So the easier or the better access we have to discussions such as this will enable us to actually know the kind of issues that we think people need to engage on. The biggest danger that I fear is that we as the Office of the Ombudsman may decide to carry out discussions on issues that are not relevant to Botswana, but issues that we may have determined from our perspective. So the more we engage in such conversations as this one today, the more we think that we can be able to have a sense of what are the topics that we need to engage on our public outreach in the general area of human rights. I thank you.
Thank you, Ray Stephen. I think that's last point also around upcoming interventions. I think that that is really great, an opportunity for the Office of the Ombuds to collaborate with human rights defenders, NGOs here. I think it would be great to work together on that. Goes back to the point that Seto also spoke about creating allies and meaningful allies that are intersectional. So I think that that is really great, and also possibly even in messaging. So having our messaging linked to the piece of the nation, if that makes sense. But yeah, there was a question from Karabo that reads, Is Botswana doing enough to combat hate speech? I mean, there is a lot of hate speech that is going on, especially on social media, and people get away with it. Sometimes they take advantage of freedom of speech to say whatever derogatory stuff and get away with it. There's also a lot of hate speech in churches, especially towards queer folks, on how especially towards queer folks. How are religious leaders held accountable for this? Also, looking at the influence that they have in society. There is I think it's the Cyber Act that just came out that also speaks to online cyberbullying. There should be a provision in the presentation that could help with it. Botswana also has the BOCRA, Botswana Communication Regulatory Authority, that holds media houses, so your radios, TVs, newspapers, accountable for hate, any form of hate, discrimination, violence that they do broadcast. And I don't know if you have listened to radio stations where they also have these adverts that go the views and opinions. No, no, not that one. If you have any problems or issues with the content, contact the station manager or Bokra, like that. So they do have those reporting channels that communities that we can take advantage of. Yeah, for churches. Yeah, so there was that a point that was made on where does free speech end and so forth. So people not normally yes to lie to hide behind, oh no, I have free speech. I can say whatever I want. But if what they're saying also incites violence, is discriminatory towards LGBTIQ people, it would be also useful to just document this. So note these down, report them to the church bodies if they're not useful. You can always go to the Office of the Human Rights. The Human Rights Office, sorry, and document this. So it also is useful to possibly have like an NGO accompany, so probably someone from, if it's Lhavibo or War or Black Queer Dogs, to accompany you to go and make these reports and just constantly follow up, even to the police as well. So opening up a case, documenting this, and having evidence as well. Also using the media to show how these religious leaders, churches are pushing hate on the pulpit, and putting it out there. If it's writing open letters, statements to the churches, and showing the effects of the hate towards communities. So I think those are some strategies that we could use to address hate. Just going through the comments quickly. I think we have about 1 minute left, but Nomsa, was that another hand or it's from earlier?
No, legacy hand. Thank you.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I think just handing it over to my co-host and just to see if our panelists also have final words that we would like to say. Danny, do we have anything on Facebook? Questions, comments from people?
Yeah, no, there is no questions or anything.
Okay, perfect, perfect. I think following this, something that Black Queer Docs and SALC has also done. So we have everyone's email addresses, those that have registered on Zoom. What we'll do is also just send out like a short Q&A session, questionnaire based on what we have discussed today. You can complete that in your own time. The fine thing about it is at the end of completing that, you get a certificate of of participation around legal strategies to address hate speech, hate crimes in Botswana, which I think is a really cool incentive also. And we will also share the presentation and additional documents with everyone. For those that are on Facebook, if you would like to also receive that, please just inbox us your email addresses to ensure that you are included. Yeah. Co-host?
Oh, well, we have 1 minute over time. So thank you so much for your attentiveness and being here on a very cold day in Botswana. Well, the southern part of Botswana, I think. And thank you so much to our contributors as well, Stephen Diriyokhosi, as well as Seto Mongatani. And to all of you that have made it here, please recognize that this conversation does not end here, and ensure that you follow the SALC page for other conversations on hate speech across the region, because we are not an island. And so I think there's different learnings that we can get from across the region. And they've also posted the other ones that have happened before this one in other countries. And yeah, we wish you a very good day, and we hope that we continue the conversations. Black Queer Docs is very much open to collaborate on those outreaches, and let us know how we are also grateful that you're always willing to, your office is always willing to come through to these conversations. It's been really a great collaboration for the last couple of years that we've had you engage with civil society on human rights, and just ensuring that we're continuously accessible, or you are accessible, your office is accessible to us. So thank you so much for that and your time. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good one, everyone.
Maybe that's why I rinwela dipiri tsa rona le setse le re bone se dipiri tsa rona. Ha gona na le sepele rona baruti mo dipateng tsa maroko a rona ga ba batle go reetsa matlhoko a rona ba hitisa manki ha thoko a rona ba re motho moseo ke modimo a rona ba tshamekela ha godimo a rona le le ka ga ba tsa di oil tsa rona di ruta tsa rona le joka ka rona, and every time media posta ka rona. They just wanna get exposure ka rona. Ba CIA ba theba di phone tsa rona, go retsa di kgang le di tone tsa rona. Le pina ya setšhaba ya re fatshe la rona, but in real life a ke fatshe la rona. Mo matsogong a ron, me matsogo a ron, a mo dipateng tsa ron, a ntsha ditsaka tsa ron, go reka biri tsa ron, le bothenda boe basadi le matšitši a ron. We need to work as a team, re tlhatswe kiti ya ron, re kolekele maklipa a ron, re ithute go dirisa matsipa a rona, cause bodara re kgoganya le masika a ron. Matitjara ba lesa go betsa bana ba ron, ka re ba lesa hanki godisa bana ba ron, e bolaile confidence ya banana ba ron. That's why ba leka go iboosta ka safana tsa ron, that's why ba rata go phamola di phone tsa rona, ka re Jesu a nka araba dikholo tsa ron, re ka kgona re thulantsa ditlhogo tsa ron, a re lelekeng ditoro tsa ron.